Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello and welcome everyone to episode 39 of the Porcupine Report. I am, as always, your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project. Thank you for joining us this evening. As you know, if you regularly watch the program, we come to you every single Wednesday with a new episode, 7 o'clock p.m., which you can generally find streaming on the Free State Project X and Facebook and YouTube and Odyssey pages. And you can also find this broadcasting under the Porcupine Report in all of your favorite podcasting apps, be that Apple or Spotify or any of them, really. And if there is a podcasting app out there that doesn't have the show, let us know and we'll remedy that very quickly. But one thing you can always do to support the show is to like and share, subscribe, whatever makes sense for the platform that you are enjoying this content on. Do what you can to give a good rating or share with a friend. Really, are you really their friend if you aren't sharing the show with them? I mean, if they love liberty, don't you want them to enjoy the wonderful conversations we're having every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock? I think so. Real friends share the Porcupine Report with their friends. And I will say, I'm really grateful that the audience for the show has been growing quite a bit as we've been coming now for 39 weeks with a new episode. And we're at the point where I'm getting a lot of ideas for guests from the audience itself. People are sending me great suggestions, and those that we can make work, I'm always looking forward to making work. That'll be one thing. Our guest today that we'll be getting to in a moment was as our first guest we're having on the show, recommended by someone in our audience. So we appreciate that very much. I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. Before we get there, a few fun things to report from the Free State over the course of the last week. I do want to give another congratulations and to our welcome director, Chris Lopez. Over this past week, we had a celebration at the Quill of her 20th year anniversary living in the Free State. She was, as if you watched our conversation a few episodes ago, she was mover number 50, and she has helped so many new movers, people who love liberty, transition and move and settle in the Free State. And so many came out to celebrate with her 20 years. So congratulations, Chris Lopez, and thank you for all you do to support the Free State movement. And I also want to say thank you. You know, we had a great volunteer night this last week, people coming out to send postcards and make phone calls. We've gotten now postcards out to every single person who came to PorcFest this last year from out of state, letting them know the Free State misses you and you're always welcome back. So thank you to all of our volunteers doing all the work every single week to do the outreach and to serve the mission of the Free State Project. All right. So let's transition into our conversation for this evening. As I mentioned, we have a guest today who has been recommended by a member of our audience. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I don't want to give away too much because the conversation itself will be a lot to discuss. But our guest today, her name is Edra Toth, and she runs the Northeastern Ballet Theater here in New Hampshire. They've got two studios in Dover and Wolfeboro, and they're also putting together a production of the Nutcracker that I'm told includes many Free State families participating in this. And that's going to be taking place in late November and throughout December. I'm going to be sure to go catch one of the shows myself. But as those who know me, I'm a fan of theater and dance, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation. At least for that reason. But Edra also has a fascinating story beyond just the work that she's doing right now, in that she was born in Hungary in the 1950s. And when she was 4 years old, the Hungarian Revolution took place, in which the people of Hungary overthrew Soviet control of their country for a brief period of time. And during that period of time, her family escaped from communism. And over time, they found, and she made her own move and ended up ultimately here in New Hampshire, working in the dance world. But it's a long story, I'm sure, from Hungary to Dover, New Hampshire. And we're going to be talking about today, all that today on the Porcupine Report. So welcome to the show, Edra Toth. Oh, I think you're muted right now, Edra.
Well,
oh, there we go.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me on your show this morning.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. I'm glad we could make it work. And I suppose, Edra, I'm trying to think the best place to start, but maybe the best place to start is just with your personal story. I mean, how obviously you were very young when you left Hungary, but it's something that has certainly is a big part of your story and your family's story. What can you tell us about your family's leaving Hungary and it in the midst of the Hungarian Revolution?
Well, Eric, it started one day when I was 4 years old, and it's 1956. And I came home from nursery school, and that evening at dinner, I asked my mother what church we went to. And my mother was a little bit aghast. First of all, that a 4-year-old child would be asking a question like that. But then she asked me, who told you to say that? And I said, oh, Mrs. So-and-so, at the nursery school. Well, that was it. I never went back to that nursery school. And it was very shortly thereafter that my family fled, taking me with them. Now, it's 1956. On October 23rd, 1956, 5,000 Soviet tanks converged on the city of Budapest and invaded it. Prior to that, the Hungarians were able to keep the Soviets up for 5 days with nothing but ingenuity and using whatever materials they had. So that, for me, was the start of it. And my parents had spoken to my grandmother, and they said that we were going to be leaving. So they kind of hatched a plan where they would have all the family members together on this one specific evening. On that, it would be family dinner. And when my father stood up and said, we're going for a walk, that was the signal that we were leaving and that this was it. So there are only 3 co-conspirators as conspirators in this, and that was my mother, my father, and my grandmother. Nobody else in the family knew because it was too dangerous. Now, my father worked for a trucking company, and he had one of his very close friends was a local policeman. We needed papers to get out of the country. So the deal was that my father would take one of these trucks. It was a rat truck, I remember it distinctly, with a canvas cover. And the policeman would give my family the papers, the necessary papers we needed, in exchange for taking his wife and infant out of the country, taking them with us. So that was all agreed upon. And at the appointed time, appointed night, that's what happened. My father stood up and said, we're going for a walk. And that was it. And we walked downstairs. I remember getting into the truck. We picked up this lady that I didn't know, and she was holding an infant, and the child was gagged. Okay. Because as I said prior to that, the 5 days that the Hungarians were able to liberate themselves from the Soviets, they were petrified of the Hungarians. So if they heard a sound, they heard a noise, you would hear nothing but, gunfire for 10 minutes. A cat jumps onto a trash can and makes a clanking noise. That was it. So it was very, very important that, you be silent. So because of that, a lot of people were not bringing their young children out with them when they escaped. They were, and from what my my mother and my cousin had told me, and my grandmother pleaded with my parents to leave me behind. And when the situation cooled down, then they could send for me. But my mother was having none of it. My mother's philosophy was, whatever fates await us, we all go together, whatever it is. Okay. So on that night, off we go. And we traveled during the night and we hid during the day. And there were safe houses, there were safe places along this route that my father took where we were able to do that. As the closer we got to, the plains and the open areas, I remember sitting between my father was on my left, my mother's on my right, and this woman was on my mother's right, holding the infant. Every 100 yards, there was a soldier on both sides of the vehicle as it's going down, with one of those submachine guns, the Kalashnikov, I can't pronounce it. And my father would have to get out, show him the papers. They would walk around to the back of the truck, open up the tarp, and then, okay, fine, give papers back to my father, and then he would have to proceed to the next one. So, it was a process. At a certain point, the lady got dropped off with her infant, and I never got her name, and I never knew whatever happened to them. I'm hoping it was okay. And then at a certain point, the truck got dumped. It got left. Now we walked. And it was really hard going with a 4-year-old because 4-year-olds get tired. They don't, walk across, the plains of a country. And I remember being just so tired and crying. And my mother would have to pick me up and carry me for a while. And my father would have to carry me. So it was, I'm sure quite tedious for them. But, on an interesting note, because, Eric, all throughout my young adulthood and my childhood too, I had this feeling that because I was just like literally ripped out of the ground, just like a plant, I was born there. That was my country. That was my homeland. Those were my people, So I had this fascination with the Hungarian Revolution. And I did a lot of research, trying to piece things together, because even though I was only 4 years old, I knew something was not right. I wasn't scared, but the air was charged with something that was not right. So I spent a lot of my time researching that. And, in 1956, we didn't have social media like we have today. Khrushchev is going all over the world espousing the people's paradise. Well, it was anything but paradise. And the revolution of 56 was pivotal because it really showed the face of communism for what it was. And Time magazine, on the cover of Time magazine that year, 1956, the Hungarian freedom fighter was the man of the year. Okay. So we cross over into Austria. Now the border, we left by what calculations that I had made, because my cousin was born 4 days after we had left. We had left in the middle of November. The border was it was unsecured. There weren't guard dogs. There weren't lights. The barbed wire fencing wasn't there. It was a ditch. And across the ditch was an Austrian soldier, because Austria was neutral in this conflict. So my father got into the middle of the ditch. My mother handed me to my father, and then he handed me to this Austrian soldier. So now we're free. Okay, so they take us to, it looked like it might have been a former hospital or a school. It was a building, but it was a very institutionalized kind of a building. And we stayed there, and my mother had told me that they had kiosks downstairs in this facility. So the United States was accepting 250,000 Hungarian refugees. South America was also accepting them, England and France, and I can't remember the other countries, but you had a choice as to where you wanted to go. So my mother wanted to get as far away from Hungary and as far away from Europe as possible. So they decided on the United States. At which point, once my father got us registered and, whatever, I remember sitting, it was an American Army transport plane, because, they had the bench seating on the sides. They didn't have like what we think of a commercial airliner. Okay.
Mhm.
And that was a vivid memory, because we weren't allowed to stand up. Now, if women and children were allowed to go to the bay doors to get some air if they were feeling queasy, so I remember my mother taking me, because I was not feeling all that well, being my first plane ride in an Army plane. Yeah, it wasn't too, comfortable. So we landed at Camp Kilmer, which is in upstate New York. Now we have a sponsor, okay? And this sponsor, his name was Mr. Moss. And Mr. Moss was a very high-powered, very well-known attorney in New York City. Mr. Moss had 12 children. He was looking for a domestic couple, man to handle the outside and any auto repairs, and the woman to, handle the cooking and the cleaning in the house. And he didn't want another child in the house. Somehow or other, he got paired with us. And I was very small for my age. And I remember peeking out behind my mother's skirt, and there's a man in a trench coat and a black fedora hat. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and I started crying. But it was too late. He had to take us. Turns out he had an estate in upstate New York. It was Garrison, New York, right next to West Point Academy. And there's a mansion there, and that was Moss's. Now, this segues into how I got into dance and how, because So back in the day, where the Hungarian Revolution is going, and chocolates, razor blades, those were better than money. Okay, you could get anything with chocolate. Now, Hershey's at that time made a 5-pound brick of milk chocolate, all right? So my mother is the domestic inside. My father's taking care of all the, the yard work and things that go wrong in the house, repairs, fixing, things like that. Of course, I learned language in like 3 days, because I'm 4 years old and I have 12 children around me. And my parents went to an adult education school, night school. So they had to learn how to speak English. We had to learn the culture of the United States. My parents were given green cards. After 6 years in the country, they became United States citizens, and I became a national. I was nationalized, because I was 10 years old by then, right? So my mother has this great big brick of chocolate. Well, of course, being 4 years old, and I'm into everything. I'm a very curious kid. I found a brick of chocolate underneath my parents' bed in their room. And my mother said, "Don't touch that, because that's going to grandmother. She needs it." Okay. Until one of the Moss girls put on this gorgeous black tutu. Oh my God. I had to have it. I had to have it. So, of course, she's a little bit older than me. She says, "Well, if I let you wear my tutu, what are you going to give me?" The chocolates. "Oh, I'll give you chocolates. Would you like chocolate?" "Okay." So I ran up the stairs, hauled the chocolate out from underneath the bed, ran downstairs. "Here you go." The whole 5 pounds, right? Well, because now all the kids in the family, everybody's, they're chowing down on chocolates. I'm wearing this black tutu, and I'm dancing, and I'm in like, I can't, it was just, that was it, right? Okay. Now she says to me, "Take the tutu off." And I'm like, "What? I gave you chocolate." "Yeah, but you're not going to wear the tutu all day long." So I had to take it off. Okay. So I got the short end of the stick on that one for sure. So,
were your parents very upset with you that
I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that one. Okay. So about a week later, my mother's going to send the chocolate to my grandmother, right? And I'm playing downstairs. Of course, by now I have completely forgotten about the chocolate, I'm 4 years old. I completely forgot about it. All of a sudden, I hear her calling my name from upstairs. And, we all know the tone, right? We all know that tone that mom uses with us when they're not pleased with us, right? We know that tone.
Oftentimes there's a middle name involved.
Oh, boy. So
Yeah.
I go running up the stairs because now I know I'm in deep doo-doo. And she says, so where's the chocolate? And of course, being a kid, I said, chocolate? What chocolate? Ooh. Mm-hmm. Well, let me just leave it at, I did not sit down for a week. And it was seared into my heart and into my soul that you're never to do this ever again, because grandmother and the family is depending on this. Now, grandmother and the family can't eat because of this. So, yeah. So that, I think, is what started my mother into, this kid and dancing. We'll wait and see what comes of this. And as it turned out, that opportunity presented itself. We are now in Massachusetts. We were up in Garrison for a year. Now, there was a small community of Hungarians that, that everybody came over, and my parents got to know another family from Hungary, during the plane rides and, all the time spent together, being moved around. And they heard of an apartment in Dorchester, Massachusetts. The Hungarian family was moving out, and these were people who were, here again, very, they were Catholic. Now, interestingly enough, the Catholic Church, the Hungarian freedom fighters, the revolutionaries, if you will, they communicated with the church. So the church had information on all the refugees that had fled to whatever country. And my mother had told my grandmother before we left, wait a year. If you don't hear from us within a year, we didn't make it, give up hope. My grandmother, because my grandmother was a devout Catholic, every single morning went to church to ask the priest if he had heard anything about the Toth family. So there was some connection. There was some information flowing between one group, the freedom fighters, and the church. They were communicating who was, who they found deceased or who made it, who didn't. And so there's all kinds of information flowing. So I thought that was very interesting. So where's it going with that? Yeah. So we're in Garrison. So this was an Irish Catholic family, and they wanted another Hungarian family up in the apartment, 8 Epping Street in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and it was right across the street from the Codman Square Library. And the apartment was too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter. It had no refrigerator. My father, took a nail and hung a nail outside the bathroom window because that faced this empty lot. This was the days before plastic. So we had paper bags, and my father put the milk and the eggs and the food products, that was our refrigerator. And one night it rained, and the bag broke, and that was it, I had lard and green pepper sandwiches for lunch. I brought that to school, with salt on the peppers, And one, I could only get away with this one time, peanut butter, because we don't have peanut butter in Hungary. My mother, peanut butter, what's peanut butter? I love the smell of the stuff. So I coerced one of my little classmates, hey, I'll trade you sandwiches. He got lard and green pepper, and I got a wonderful peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
So that was a better trade than the last one. You got the better end of the stick there.
I did. So, So our landlady's daughter, she had 5 boys and 1 girl who just happened to be my age. And Mrs. Collins went to my mother and said, Mrs. Toth, I think Janie's going to start. I want to start dancing lessons, but she really needs a friend to go with, and I'll pay for your daughter's classes. No worry. But so I went as a companion. So the upshot of it was that Janie ended up quitting, and I ended up becoming a principal dancer with the Boston Ballet by the age of 16. So that's the way I got into dance.
So that was a lucky opportunity to find your path there.
But Eric, I don't believe in coincidences. I
Yeah.
think this is all set up. And my first dance teacher, she was magnificent, Miss Morova. She had a Southern accent, but she had a Russian last name. Turns out she was a showgirl at Lindstrom's. And when I was 10 years old, she went to my mother and said, Mrs. Toth, your daughter does not belong here. Take her to Boston Ballet. And so my mother did. And, we were very poor. Back in those days, my mother was working in a nursing home, Eric, 90 cents a week. And my father was working at the green shoe factory, which later became Stride Right. He was bringing in, he was a pieceworker, was making $2.50 a week.
Yeah. So this would this have been in the 60s?
60s, yes, early 60s,
Okay.
yeah.
At least we still had a partial gold standard back then, so 90 cents was worth a little bit more, but still
more than what it is today, for sure. So, my mother, when Miss Williams, I didn't like the class. I didn't want to go there, I didn't know, unbeknownst to me, my mother had spoken with Miss Williams, who is the founder and director of Boston Ballet. And my mother said, my daughter, I've been told my daughter has talent. I don't know anything about this, but she lives and eats and breathes dance. And so I want you to take a look at her and see what her chances are of being, someday a professional. Because if it's not in the cards for her, then I have to redirect her, get her off of this fixation that she has and love about dance. Well, Miss Williams saw me, and oh my gosh, Mrs. Todd, starting tomorrow, your daughter's on full scholarship. She's come to these classes, blah, 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 And so we're on the bus going home, and my mother says to me, how did you like class? Oh, I hated it. Oh, I'm so glad I'm never going back. And my mother said, she started laughing. She said, well, sweetie, let me tell you what Miss Williams told me, okay? I had to be weaned off of Miss Morova because Miss Morova was, to me, like the goddess of the dance. And she was blonde, and she wore matching leotards and chiffon skirts. Back in the day, we didn't have that. I mean, we have it now, but back then, that was not common. And she was so sweet and so kind. Miss Williams, she walks in the studio. Now, I'm used to being in a class with like 6 little kids, right? I'm in a class with like 40 people, okay? All right? And in comes this woman. She was late. She slams the door. Now, I'm a child of the Revolution. I was put in a basement by myself, locked in this cubicle as bombs were falling down on Budapest. Any loud, sudden noises, I want to run and hide. So automatically, first impression from my end of it was not very good. So, yeah. So I cried, and my mother had to speak with Miss Morova, and, can you give her, all I can afford is one private lesson, every 2 weeks. I mean, she's devastated. So that lasted for about 2 months, and then I saw how much I was learning and how I was growing, and I was loving it even more and more and more and more and more. And it's like, yeah, I think I better go to Boston Ballet. So at the age of 10, that first year, I received a Ford Foundation scholarship. At the age of 11, another Ford Foundation scholarship. At the age of 12, yet another. And at the age of 13, I was inducted into the Boston Ballet. I was in the corps until the age of 14. At 14, I was made a soloist. And then at the age of 16, I became principal dancer. So I was what you'd call a child prodigy. Now, back in Hungary, what was going on was that, of course, here in Massachusetts, Boston Ballet is coming into its own. It's becoming very famous, as is Boston Opera. And my name is Boston Ballet. Always promoted me as Hungarian born, Boston raised, Boston trained. Okay. So my grandmother over in Budapest is writing letters to my mother saying, whatever you do, she's never, ever to come back to this country, because my name, they were using my name for propaganda, the Soviets, the communists. My name was on a list that they had in front of Budapest Opera House. And they were saying, see, Hungarians, look at the talent. They made it sound like they were promoting me. It's all inverted and twisted.
So just for clarity, I'm trying to understand. So in the States, you're being promoted as Hungarian born, but Boston trained, Boston raised. But in Hungary, the Soviets were trying to claim you as a great product of their system.
Yeah.
And so, what would have been the danger if you had come to Hungary?
Eric,
that would have dispelled that propaganda.
No, possession is 9/10 of the law. They would have grabbed me.
Oh, they would have claimed. I see. They would have claimed you as.
Yeah. And there was infiltration. This is how they do it. Okay. I believe that long before the Soviets even invaded, they were already infiltrating the country. They were going to people, people can be bought, for a price, as we know. People can be bought for a promise of a better life. Well, everybody else is going to get bombed, but you're going to get a brand new house in the country. Oh, who knows,
Yeah.
So there was a certain contingent of Hungarians, okay, and they were fearful for their life. I don't blame them really, but my grandmother's best friend, who happened to be a next door neighbor, okay, they went to church every morning together. They did everything together. Was spying on my grandmother because they got to her. When packages, my mother would go to. We did our shopping at Morgan Memorial back in the day, and so my mother would pick up whatever grandmother said that she needed for grandpa or for one of the uncles or one of the other cousins. My mother would save her pennies, and once a month this package would go over to Hungary for my grandmother. My grandmother's next door neighbor, the address, United States. She goes and she tells the local police department. Now, my grandmother at the time was in her 60s, early 70s. My cousin at this time, now she's 4 years old, okay? And they're coming to her house, knocking on her door, asking her, you need to come to the police station and answer a few questions. So my grandmother's there with my cousin, with my little cousin. My grandmother says, well, I can't go without bringing the child with me. They wanted her to leave the 4-year-old at home so they could go and question her, right? In conversations with my cousin years, 50 years later, she said, her mom and dad told her when the men come to talk to get grandma to go to the police station, you go with grandma. Don't you go, you go, right? So that ensured my grandmother that they would release her if she had a child. Because then my cousin got savvy. So she started acting like a brat, after about half hour, 40 minutes, she started carrying on, right? Because the last thing they want is to hear, a kid, carrying on and creating chaos. She was good at that, right? But they had my parents' address in the United States. That was the problem. So my mother, my grandmother communicated with my mother with letters, okay? Every single letter my mother got from my grandmother, my mother tore up and threw away. She did not want, because in her mind, don't forget, my mother went through World War II, which ended 1948, something like that. In the 1956, he would go through the revolution. It was too much, So that mindset of always being watched, of always being followed, that was so ingrained in her that she didn't even trust leaving mail from Hungary, at her home. Yeah, horrible. And people in this country, Eric, we've not had, merciful God, thank you, God, we've not had bombs falling on our head. We've not had our cities decimated from bombs dropping from the sky, And so I think it's kind of, maybe for some people, it's really kind of hard to wrap their heads around this kind of, yeah.
I certainly think that sometimes when in our own political culture, how casually we talk about war and how casually we enter into wars or perpetuate wars in other parts of the world. I sometimes wonder if we would be a little bit more thoughtful if we did have those experiences. So certainly, I hope that those experiences never are visited on America. But it's sometimes I wonder the fact that we are so insulated. I mean, we're kind of a fortress nation with oceans on both sides. We're pretty secure over here. I wonder sometimes to what degree that detachment, though, from the realities of war that so many others have experienced, like your family has experienced, contributes to some of the policies that are pursued. But,
well, you know, it's a desensitization.
yeah.
The entertainment industry, even our music industry, you know, yeah, in essence, glorifies it.
Yeah.
We live in
Yeah.
a death culture, unfortunately, but that's changing now. Thank you, God. But yeah, I mean, we're desensitized to it.
Yeah.
You know.
So you went from you were kind of a star of the Boston Ballet, child prodigy. You were being celebrated by both your adoptive culture and the regime that ruled over the culture of your birth. As time went on, how did you kind of reconcile those things as you got older? I'm certain, you know, it was still several decades until the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. How did you reconcile those things in the meanwhile? And when we did finally get to the fall of the Berlin Wall, what was that moment like for you?
Well, it was beyond belief. And I want to backtrack a little bit. I want to go back to the studio because this will answer. Okay. So the pianist, because back in the day we didn't have CD players, of course, we had live music, and it was a pianist, and it was Mr. Hobbs. And Mr. Hobbs was Miss Williams's husband, and he, in his own right, was a concert pianist, and he would play for her classes. And I had a conversation with him once, and he told me back then, and I'm going back to 1962. He said to me, he says, you know, he said, someday communism is going to end. Someday that wall is coming. Someday Hungary is going to be free. And I also knew that he was here again, instrumental. He was connected to a church. I forget which denomination, but it's just very, I mean, I'm looking at the pattern of all of this, and it's like the church is always like in the background, you know. And I said, oh, well, Mr. Hobbs, I hope you're right, because, you know, I really miss my family. And, but yeah, he kind of predicted it, you know, and he was very, very confident about his information. It wasn't like, well, maybe, you know, if we pray hard enough or whatever. No, it wasn't like that. It's all going to crumble. It's all going to fall. Hungary's going to be free. The wall's coming. Everything is going to be. I don't know if the wall was built in 1962. Did we talk about the wall? But anyway, yeah. So it was very, I felt like I had my feet in two worlds, is how it felt. My mother was telling me, behind the front door, you a Hungarian girl. So I had to speak Hungarian at home. If I spoke to my mother in English, she got no response. Because that stuff pissed me off royally when I was a teenager, right? And now I'm like, thank you, Mom, so much, because now I have my language. You know, I didn't lose it. But then she said, on the other side of that front door, you American girl. So it was at times conflicting, because I really didn't have an identity. And I think that's what really drove me to do all the research that I did on the Hungarian Revolution and everything that went down, because those are my roots. I had to know what happened, and I had to have an identity, you know. Yeah.
Did you visit Hungary at all before the end of the Soviet Union, and have you visited Hungary since the fall of the Soviet Union?
Okay, 52 years later, I went back.
Yeah.
52. Because here again, it was so ingrained upon me. And my mother, I know my mother loved Hungary. I mean, the stories that she used to tell me about, being out in the countryside, being with the gypsies, being just this life. So this, she embroidered it so beautifully for me, And then on the other hand, it was like, no, we're never going back. And don't you ever, ever go back. Because if you go back there, there's no guarantee you're coming home.
Yeah.
And I've heard that all my life. So it wasn't until 2008, that my husband and I went back. And there's something that was so visceral. When my feet touched the ground at the airport in Budapest, it was like, I'm home. I'm home. And to hear your language being spoken, I mean, that's what was like, that was my greatest joy. I'm walking down the street, my husband and I are walking down the street, my cousins, with us. And, I'm hearing my language being spoken all around me.
Where you'd only your whole life had that in your home with your immediate family.
Yeah.
I have to imagine. I mean, if you left when you were 4 years old. I know when I try to remember things from when I was 4 years old, the best I have is very fuzzy memories, right? Although maybe if I had gone through something as intense as you did, maybe those memories might be more kind of seared in. But so 52. So you go from 4 years old, 52 years, not visiting Hungary again. But obviously it's still being a big part of your life in terms of your family's identity and even knowing that people are celebrating you back there. Was it kind of like when you stepped there, was it like a dream becoming a reality?
Oh, it was way better than that. I mean, it was like a whole other, like a dimension shift. I felt like I was on a whole other planet. It was a whole other realm. And, it's very interesting because my second language is English, and I learned that when I was 4 years old. Okay. So I became very adept when my mother was, dealing with people that she didn't understand or things she needed to understand. I mean, I can switch back and forth from Hungarian to English like water, like it's nothing. So when my husband and I went over, and of course we're staying at my cousin's house, which is also my grandmother's house. Okay, so that was very special, and that's a whole other show right there. But and my cousin's like, how do you do that? Because I'm speaking to my husband in English, and he asked me a question, and I'm telling my cousin what he just said, and she's responding back to what he just said. So it's like, is that crazy? But speaking about that real quick, I do want to share this story with you because this is very interesting, and it shows to the depth of the evil and the depth of the that communism was all about. So it's 1971 thereabouts. And of course, I'm up and coming to Boston Ballet. Now, Boston Opera had contracted with the Budapest Opera House to bring over Béla Bartók's Béla Bartók's trilogy. And there were like 3 little mini operas into one main opera, if you will. Okay. So she thought it'd be great to have Hungarian dancers. The principals were all Hungarian dancers. And the corps, she contracted with Boston Ballet, for the, the other dancers that the ballet needed. So, and Virginia said to Sarah Caldwell, who's the director of the Boston Opera, well, you don't need to get an interpreter because we have a dancer here who speaks fluent Hungarian. Okay. So I was asked if this was something I wanted to do. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I would love to do that. Meet other Hungarian dancers. I think it would be great. So the Hungarian company comes over here, right? And I'm involved in these meetings between Boston Opera House, Boston Ballet, and the director that came over, the director of the, not the Opera House wholly, but he was director of the ballet section of the Opera House, the dance section, Dörzse Imre. So we're all sitting in a meeting, and there was a restaurant in Boston called the Cafe Budapest. So it was like, real Hungarian food. So I'm in these meetings, right? And then the dancers come over. Now it's very interesting. I found the dancers to be very standoffish. And along with the dancers came this whole cadre of non-dancers who were in trench coats and black fedoras. So I asked somebody, forget who it was, who are these people? And they're hanging around the studio, and it's like, okay, oh, it's KGB. Oh, okay. So the KGB, they really messed up because they did not bring any female agents with them. They're all men, right? So I'm in the bathroom at Boston Ballet, the studio. One of the Hungarian dancers follows me to the ladies' room. She says, Levi jeans in Hungary, we sell on the black market. We get a lot of money, for the Levi brand. She said, tomorrow I'll give you money. Can you go and buy us some jeans? And I said to her, because I'm a rebel, absolutely. Okay. Do you have any sizes? No preference. Just, we can give you a bunch of money. Go shopping. And the drop-off point was the ladies' room.
The one place, even no male KGB
right.
agent would enter.
Dancers always carry big dance bags with our point shoes, our tights, our leotards, our deodorant, our snacks. So we were always carrying these big bags. So I would go into the ladies' room, sure enough, and she comes, hands me $300. This is back in the 70s. And Boston Ballet at that time, the studios were on Washington Street, right in downtown Boston, So I would take a couple of days, I'd go to Jordan Marsh, pick up a couple of pairs of jeans, and then I'd go to Filene's the next day. So I kind of, because I don't know if I was being followed, and who knew, right? I'm Hungarian too, right? Yeah. And I would drop off my, I would go into the bathroom. I would wait 5 minutes. I'd hear the door open. I'd open up the stall door. Okay, here you go. But I mean, to live like that, they were so appreciative. She was so appreciative. But out in the studio, she was like this with me,
Yeah. You have to have your private face and your public face for when the KGB agents are watching.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, so I want to make sure we get into some of these other elements before we run out of time. So now you have your Northeastern Ballet Theater based here in New Hampshire. Well, first of all, I want to ask, obviously you were in the New England area. You were, Hungarian-born, Boston-raised, Boston-trained dancer. Why did you choose New Hampshire as the place where you are now making your life and your profession as you work with younger dancers?
Well, okay. I'll backtrack a little bit. New Hampshire picked me. I didn't pick New Hampshire. I know that sounds weird. Okay. But actually, I met my husband 26 years ago now. And he lived up in New Hampshire. And my mother had recently passed. And so there was I had a studio in Massachusetts. And I started teaching when I was 21 because I loved children. I was an only child. So I loved children and I loved ballet. And I knew that, someday, I'm not going to be able to perform forever. I want to be able to continue on with my work. So I opened up my first studio in Wayland, Massachusetts at the age of 21. And last year was my, 50th year of teaching. And so I had a studio in Hudson. And I met my husband, and it was like, this is it. It's time. So I relocated up here because he has a business up here. So I moved up and I started my own studio. Then that became 2 studios, and here we are. And I've always I've always loved New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Always loved New Hampshire, but the thought of living up here, that really never entered my mind. And I did visit up in New Hampshire. I'm not I don't ride. I ride motorcycles. I don't drive them. You know, I like being on the back of a bike. So there are a couple of trips that I came up on the back of a bike, and I thought it's a beautiful country. Oh,
You must have been coming up in the autumn, because that's the most beautiful time in New Hampshire, right? When the leaves changing.
that and a couple of summertime trips. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you have coming up this late November and
Yes, we have.
December, you have a production coming up with a lot. I imagine a lot of your students are playing roles in this production. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, excuse me. So, the purpose of NBT, okay, aside from, ballet just really gives children so much more than just being, being beautiful on stage and dancing on your toes. It gives you so much more, more. And, the one thing it really instills in children is never give up, because you're competing with yourself. You're trying to be better for yourself.
Yeah.
So, So we do the Nutcracker every single year. And I train New England, New Hampshire dancers, because what I'm seeing is that I train these wonderful, talented, beautiful dancers. They go off to other companies and they leave. I want to keep them here, Eric, so that they can, we need to have a ballet company, like a state ballet company, like Boston Ballet, and it's very interesting, because back in the day, Virginia Williams was asked on 3 separate occasions, and she was even offered $160,000 from the Ford Foundation to create a ballet company. And her response was, it'll never fly, because Boston is a sports town. It's not a cultural center. And look at what it became. She and Sarah Caldwell and the Boston Symphony, those were the 3. Yeah. Boston became the hub, because I think we can do the same thing right here in New Hampshire. I really do. So all the dancers, they're all New Hampshireites. And trained by me and my incredible staff, And so that's a poster. I don't know if you can, this is some of my dancers. Yeah. I can have we can send you an electronic copy of this if you want. But anyway, so those dates are Kingswood Performing Arts Center in Wolfeboro, New Hampshire, Saturday, November 30th at 7 p.m. and Sunday, December 1st at 2 p.m. And then on the 14th and the 15th with the UNH Johnson Theater, 7 p.m. on the 14th and 2 p.m. on the 15th. And you can order tickets through our website, which is northeasternballet.org, or you can call 603-834-8834. That's my number for,
Awesome.
Yeah, so.
Well, I'm certain that after hearing your story and what you're attempting to, and what you are building here in New Hampshire with your students, I'm sure that many folks will be eager to come out. I know I'm going to be looking forward to it, as I've mentioned to you, and I've mentioned in my audience from time to time that I'm a big fan of the performing arts. I miss my own past days in the performing arts. I've never trained in ballet, but I did train for several years in modern dance and Eric Hawkins technique and Pilabolus based non-traditional partnering, which of course I didn't appreciate at the time, but now that I'm in New Hampshire, I do appreciate that. Pilabolus was a company that was founded in Dartmouth, so here in New Hampshire as well. So that's
Eric, it's never too late to start ballet. Never too late. No, seriously, we start them at 3, and our oldest student, are you ready for this? Is 82.
All right,
and she takes ballet lessons to improve her skating. How you like them apples?
Well, the one thing my modern teacher, I trained with a guy named Bill Wade out in Cleveland, Ohio, at a company, Inlet Dance Theater, and he'd always say, "Oh, in ballet, the man is just the the ladies' kickstand.
Not true.
Not true.
It is in the Petit ballets, okay,
Yeah.
in the Russian ballets, not in the Bournonville, not in the Danish. Bournonville, men and women were equal.
Ah, okay. All right. All
Okay.
right. Well, I have a little bit more to learn about ballet, so I'm going to look forward to the Nutcracker. And any final words you want to share, Edra, before we wrap up here?
Well, I think, yes, I do. We're born into this world, as they say, with nothing. Well, that's not quite true, because we are born into this world with currency. And that currency is called love. And when we leave this world, it's true, we can't take anything with us, right? Nothing. Except the love that we've given, the love that we've shared, and the love that we've received. That's currency. So if people operate from that state and that point of view of spreading the love, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what. I know so many people are suffering and just it's just craziness going on. You have to step outside of that and find your currency, because it's there and it will never leave you, and it will follow you, and it will grow. So, and hope to see you at the ballet.
All right. A beautiful sentiment. Thank you for the conversation today, Edra, and I'll look forward to the Nutcracker this winter.
Okay, excellent. I can use that email, right, that you sent me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be in touch, and you let me know, figure out when you want to go, and when your wonderful producer, she's a sweetheart. You're very blessed to have her.
All right. Well, we'll do. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Have a great day.
You as well. All right, everyone, that's the show. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation, the fascinating conversation, a fascinating story, as much as I did. I also want to remind you, as always, to check out our community events with the Free State Project at fsp.org. Actually, at the time that this show airs, Wednesday at 7, because we pre-record sometimes, I'll be actually at a murder mystery party in the Boston area with Tom Woods and many other Free Staters and lovers of liberty. So that's going to be a fun. So if you're watching this when it first airs, know that I'm trying to figure out who done it. Thank you, as always, to our technical producer, Renita. I will note that next week we have scheduled Andrew Heaton to be on the program. We're going to be talking about his book that I just got in the mail, which is Tribalism is Dumb. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating read, and we'll be talking about this next week. So be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 7 for a conversation with Andrew Heaton. And I suppose that's it. All right, everyone. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.